Okay, and we are live.
We are. Are we live? We're
Yes.
live on Facebook and stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I got to double check, but
All right. Let me ask. Get my wife to check too.
yeah, I got up on Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, we live. We live. Cool. Cool. Cool.
Okay. All right. So,
We made it
where
work.
are we? Where are we
I know,
finally?
right? Do you
Finally.
want to just go from
Well,
here? Just keep it going
sure.
and.
Yep. Yep.
All
This
right.
is like I said, if there's the headphones give out, I have another set that are here. So,
All right. Yeah, I can
anyway,
see it.
you
My wife can see it. We're good. We're live.
Mhm.
All right. So this is one of many. We're doing a series. We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics, but today, one of the topics we're going to be talking about is uh, the world's first religions. You know, there was a question asked a while back about what were people worshiping before the Bible? What were some religions before the Bible? And so we want to dive into that topic today. This isn't just opinions. This is research. These are facts. These are truth that we're going to be talking about today. And so we hope this helps someone, helps to educate others. And yeah, that's what we're talking about. And we're going to dive right in. One of the first things I just wanted to say before we even start talking about religions is that I hope we all have an understanding that, nothing can be created without a creator, right? And so this idea that things just poofed out of thin air or, somehow human beings evolved from a parasite to monkeys to human beings, there is no type of logic that flows from those concepts. And if that's something that people believe, I would advise them to just read Genesis to see how the world was formed and the intelligent design that was put behind everything that was created. And so, I just want to start off by saying that, nothing ever in this world was created without a creator. And at no point in time can you find anything that was created without a creator. And so I do want to just touch on that. Did you have anything, Dan, to just say on that before we get moving?
Yeah, just real briefly, if anybody had any comments that they wanted to make, they could also put it in Facebook, and we can see it there. So don't be shy about the comments or
There you
questions or
go.
whatever.
There you
So
go.
the other thing too is that and I'm glad that you brought that up, Mark, about Genesis in the beginning and the religions and all that. But the one question I would have is just to kind of start it off is if you were to listen to music, let's say something from Beethoven, and you went to a show, you paid your money, you got your tickets, you sat there, and the piano was out of tune, and the orchestra leader wasn't able to pull it together, and it kind of really didn't sound correct. Would you would you automatically blame Beethoven,
Mm,
or would you blame the orchestra?
mm.
Who would you blame there?
Um, that's a good question. I think I would have to blame Beethoven. Well, no, I'm sorry, the orchestra. I would have to blame the orchestra.
Right, right, and that's a logical conclusion, right? We of course we would blame the orchestra because we know that Beethoven was a genius in the music that he wrote, and we also know that the music that that he created was like top top of the game, right? But somehow or another, when we look at the world and how the world works and creation and so forth, and the systems that have that are put together, somehow or another we blame the creator. We don't we don't blame the system. We don't blame anything else, and that really kind of grieves me at times. And where I think with the religion piece, with the other the religions prior to or in addition to what the Jews had, it's like they weren't satisfied with what they had. They didn't for whatever reason they strayed. You look at we could trace that all the way back to Cain, right? Cain and Abel, where Cain's bloodline, of course, was the bloodline where cities came from and music came from and weapons came from, the different technologies and so forth. So it's somehow or another, I don't, there's the thinking out there that just kind of puts God on the hook. God did this and God this and God that. It's like I don't know. I think you're letting a lot of things off the hook there. A lot of systems off the hook.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we as humans tend to, want to place blame on everything else, instead of taking responsibility for, like you said, us putting our own systems and religions in place and ideologies in place. And that's a really good point. And I definitely appreciate that analogy too. That was a good one. I wasn't ready for that one. I had to catch myself for a second. That was a good one. So, as we kind of get into some of the world's first religions, I think it's very important to talk about how a lot of these religions first start out as oral. They were passed down orally. Mm-hmm. And you bring up some good points. We've talked in our studies, and I would love for you just to share your concept and ideas on the oral aspect of it, because before it was written, a lot of it was oral.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, we all, in elementary school and middle school, we all have that experience where the teacher or guidance counselor or whoever person in a position of authority has this kind of like line up or sit in our desks and we'll say something to the first student, and then the first student whispers it to the second student, to the third student, to the fourth student. And, you get 5 or 6, 7, 8 levels back, and there's really no understanding of where the message was as to what was being said, But the
telephone,
thing about
right?
it,
they called that telephone.
Yeah. Right, telephone. Right. So one of the interesting things is, of course, is that the first thing is that when that's done, we're children, right? So a little bit undisciplined at times. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that we come from a culture where the oral tradition really isn't, that's not really the way that we communicate our histories. We do have grandma that tells us little stories here and there, and sometimes grandma changes a little piece here and there every time every time it gets retold, or the neighbor tells you the story every time, a little different. But those stories are more or less for community and for entertainment, and where they're not giving you this deep ideological ideas, this deep family history. It's just our culture just doesn't do that. However, there are cultures out there that do that, where the people that are charged with that responsibility really have to, tell the story exactly the way they were told it from their father or from their grandfather, or, it's like part of their culture. So the analogy of the story just like kind of not matching, is it going to be perfectly told from one generation to another? No, it's not going to be perfect. But it's going to be a lot better because that culture embraces the oral tradition. The other thing too is that a lot of the cultures that have this oral tradition do not have the written word, right? They don't have that. They don't have that. They don't have an alphabet, right? They just kind of have this oral tradition that gets started, and then one generation tells the next generation. So in a way, it's just kind of like a false kind of, way of comparing it,
Yeah, and that's a great point because as we get into what were the religions before the Bible, what were people worshiping before the Bible, it's very important to note this because as we get into these religions, all of them had an oral tradition first. And so, a lot of people will talk about how this or that's inaccurate. And it's obvious that people haven't done their research because if you do, again, like Hinduism is quote unquote one of the oldest religions that's out there, right? And even that started out as an oral tradition. You can look this up on the Britannica. You can look this up on PBS. There's a lot of different websites that you can Google that are credible, have been credible for 50 years, 100 years, or at least their publications have, this before internet. So we encourage you guys to do your own research with this stuff, right? We're bringing to you the research that we've done. We are believers, so, we believe in the Bible, but it's a great question. Before the Bible, what was kind of going on? And one of the important things to note is that when the Bible starts, this is before the Bible. Right. So when we start talking about Adam and Eve, you get into Moses, like there was no Bible at this time. And so the Bible does cover, this conversation as well. We just want to give you a wider view of it so that you can understand the truth that the Bible does carry, even outside when you look at history, right? And so outside of Hinduism, you have Judaism, which is the second oldest religion in the world, which is where Christ comes from, and Moses, and the Torah, and this was the books that Moses wrote. And so interesting enough, when you read Genesis, again, this is before Moses, there's a story in there about the Tower of Babel. And so, Dan, I would love for you to share, the importance of this story and how this kind of ties other religions into the bigger picture.
Yeah. Well, this is part of the where people now are going into cities and they're developing into cities. And if you remember what God said, God said to go out and to multiply, right? And so now what's happening is that process has stopped, and they are basically congregating in cities. And part of the other thing too is that now they want to build a building that is going to go up to meet God. So here it really is now a turning of, as opposed to having faith in God, having faith in themselves, so that they are going to be able to reach God on their own accord. They're going to build this building that's going to be so tall, and of course, God sees that and breaks apart the building, and then gives the world all of the languages that are to confuse everybody and all of that. So that would never happen again. But here again, we could see where people have taken it upon themselves that they are going to now be in a position where they can kind of almost control God. At their behest, they're going to be able to reach him and do whatever they want. This type of thing. And that didn't fly. That didn't fly at all.
Yeah, and that's a very important part in the Bible for a number of reasons. Like Dan said, this is where you get different languages, because at the time when they were building, they were all having one language and they were able to communicate, and they came together to build this tower. This is also one of the first times in the Bible that you see where man does something, creates something to worship themselves, right? Worship their own creation. So this is really one of the first times, and this is in Genesis now, where you start to see the idol worship come into play. And so again, this is important because when you start talking about the first religions of the world, when you start talking about before the Bible, this is some of the things that were happening before the Bible was actually brought into play, even before the scriptures. Again, Moses wrote the first 5 books, I believe, right? So this is before Moses wrote the first 5 books and everything. And so again, you can do your own research on this stuff. The other thing I want to say too is that when you get into the oral part of how tradition and religion was passed down, it is said that Judaism dates back further than Hinduism. So I want to make sure we make that clear. When they say Hinduism is one of the world's oldest religions, they're talking about from a text standpoint. Now, I know there's a lot of questions that will be asked about African religion and all that type of stuff. We'll get to that. Trust me, we're definitely going to get to that. But you also have to understand that the origination of man was in Africa, or that continent. I mean, it's a very massive piece of land, and we're talking like Egypt, and I mean, there's over 100 countries, 150 countries, 200 countries, or something like that. Within Africa. So we'll get to the African religions, but to be honest, that's way down the line when you start talking about the world's first religions. And again, this is based on research. So I encourage you, if you are into this ancestry, African religion type of stuff, do your research, see how long after Judaism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism is another one. I know I'm saying it wrong, but this was another one of the world's oldest religions where it was like a good God versus an evil God type of thing, which, if you believe in God and the definition, if you look up the definition of God, this is all supreme being. So how could good have any type of comparison or even battle with evil? If you believe in God, right? Like if you believe in the all supreme being God, then evil stands no chance. It's not even a battle. It's not even a discussion. But again, the Tower of Babel is a very important story. It's one of the first times we do see where idol is built in the sense of this tower. And then from there, you start to see in the Bible other idols. They're called teraphim, I believe. And these were like basically little trinket type of idols that people would have in their homes to, pray to, get advice to protect them from evil, different things like that. And so, and the Bible speaks about these things. So the Bible doesn't shy away from what people were believing in before the scriptures were written, before Moses stepped on the scene. In fact, you mentioned Cain and Abel. So it was their other brother, Seth, that came onto the scene, and it was through his bloodline that they first started worshiping God. And this is before the Tower of Babel. So that's something else to also keep in mind. One of the other things I do want to mention, and this is no disrespect to anybody's religion, what they believe in, but when you look at a religion like Hinduism, one of the main deities is like a cow, right? And so, again, no disrespect to any other religion, but when you read the Bible, it does talk about that God has given us dominion over the fish, over the animals, over the birds. Like we are supposed to have dominion over all animals. So for me, I can't believe in a cow. And this is me. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I can't believe in a cow to be a god, especially when I eat meat, right? Like I eat hamburgers. So that one's a tough one for me. But I do want to make sure that I throw that in there before we continue.
Yeah. So that's interesting how you were able to pull that out. But one of the things that's very clear from Genesis is that so it's this creation, right? So God creates this, God creates that, and then he allows Adam then to name the animals, right? And so one of the relationships that we see that's formed between God and human beings, right, is that God has created, right, and then man discovers, right? So man does not create and God discovers, right? So it's and we don't create for for ourselves, and we're not, so it's that's the relationship. So when we begin to look at those that would have idols and would have these types of things, it really is kind of backwards how they're doing it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, and you bring up a good point. Is that the the thing about it is that the Bible doesn't say don't do this because it doesn't have any power, right?
Mm,
The Bible doesn't say don't do this because it'll get you sidetracked. The Bible doesn't say any of that. The Bible just says stay away from it, right? It
good.
doesn't, it doesn't exalt it, but it just tells everybody to stay away from idol worship, stay away from all of these types of things. Uh, you know, um, the occult and talking to the dead and all of these types of things that people do. The Bible just says stay away from it. And the thing about it is that one of the reasons why God had his chosen people, right, was that so the rest of the world could see exactly what it was that he brought to the table. In other words, they could see the blessings that Israel had. They could see all of those types of things, and they would be drawn to that as opposed to worshiping their idol of whatever it was, whatever. And that was one of the things. Of course, Israel, of course, got sidetracked any number of times, but
Yeah, that's a really
that's
good
part of
point.
the human.
That's a really good point, because especially when you start reading in Exodus, when the Israel or Jacob, because they go to Egypt because of a famine, and so they're about 70 deep at that time when they go to Egypt to escape the famine. Egypt is the number one power in the world at the time, thriving. They have homes and but they have a bunch of different religions. And again, the Bible does not shy away from mentioning the fact that there are these other religions. It just tells you to stay away from them. And the reason being is because you can easily get pulled in, sucked into these other religions of what people are doing. So even in Egypt, I mean, they had hundreds of different gods, little g's, right? And I mean, they had the sea. I can't remember the name of it, but they worship, the water, and then they worship the moon, and they had all these different gods for different things. The rain. They had a rain god and all this other stuff. And so, like you said, that's the original reason why God chose Abraham, or Abram, changed his name to Abraham, so that he could have his own people to be an example to the world of what a real God was. And the other thing is when you look at the Ten Commandments, right? And so when the Ten Commandments, when God brings the Ten Commandments, and I love Dan for you to expound on this, but it shows the fairness of God across the board, and even outside of the Ten Commandments. Again, when you read Exodus, this is before a Bible was written. This is before any scrolls or anything like that. God talks about treating foreigners fair and justly, because the Israelites were foreigners in Egypt. And so, but Dan, I want you to expand on the Ten Commandments and how that separates the Christian or believer religion from all other religions.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things too is I just wanted to touch on Egypt there for a second. When each one of the plagues that comes across, right, that God brings through Moses, each one of those plagues represented each one of those Egyptian gods, right? So, and we know even with the serpent in the court, right there, that those magicians had that power.
Yep.
They had that, and God wanted to demonstrate, in a very, very powerful way, exactly, who he is. And you may have these little gods hanging around. They're nothing. They're nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
And then
and real
finally,
quick, real quick before you expand, I just want to again hit on that one more time. Like, you guys got to understand, if you haven't done your research, if you don't know the history, if you don't know what these other gods and religions represent, I encourage you to read Exodus, read Genesis, understand the beginning, and then do your own research as well. But they, like Dan said, when Moses went to get the people of Israel out of Egypt, he did perform these miracles. And the crazy thing is that he had sorcerers, he had magicians that were able to duplicate to a certain extent some of these same signs and wonders. But the difference was every single time God outdid them. So like with the serpent, so God told Moses to throw his staff down on the ground and would turn into a snake. And so that would be a sign to show Pharaoh that, he was God. So Moses goes in front of Pharaoh and his whole court with all these magicians and sorcerers and stuff like that. And Moses throws his staff down and becomes a snake. Well, Pharaoh's court looks around like, oh, we could do that too. And they threw their spears down or their staffs down, and it became snakes. The difference was Moses' staff ate all the other snakes, right? And so it was I think like 4 or 5, because I think it was like they did one with the blood in the Nile, in the water, in the river, and they were able to do something similar to that too. But then it got to a point where their sorcerers and their magicians couldn't duplicate these miracles, and that's when they knew that the God that was with Moses was different than all the other gods that they had. So I just want to again clarify that, because that's deep. When you think about, the Bible doesn't shy away from this. If this was just a man-made book off of man-made emotions and feelings, you would think something like that would be taken out. In fact, they also state that in Egyptian culture, one of the things that a pharaoh would do is if there was something that didn't go right during their reign, they would exit out of the books. They wouldn't put it in there because they didn't want they didn't want it to look bad on their part. So think about that, right? Like if there wasn't really a God-inspired book, then man themselves would have took that type of information out just to then delete it from history altogether. So the fact that you see this stuff, God doesn't shy away from this stuff. He's not scared of these types of conversations. And that's one of the reasons why we want to bring these conversations to you guys.
Yeah, they just were completely not able to stop the power of God, and then that was a tremendous statement. But it was also the same thing with, and it just reminds me of that story where Jesus and the disciples are up at Caesarea Philippi, and they journey all the way up there, and it's actually like a very mystical type of a place. The water. There's no sense of where the water is coming from, right? So there's a pool that's there, and it's actually coming out from the bottom of the mountain. And it's one of those places. It's actually the village of Dan, right? So it was one of those places where it was, kind of like occult practices and, all of these types of things that were going on, for all of these years. And also carved into the mountain is a statue of Caesar, right? So on top of all of this kind of idol worship and all of that, and it's there where Jesus says to Peter, "Who is it that you say that I am?" And he says, "You are the Christ." And he says, "You didn't, know this yourself. It's my Father in heaven who has revealed it to you." There again, we see the power of God in one of the darkest places that Jesus could have taken them to. He takes them to this place, and it is there that the Holy Spirit is still able to just push away all of this darkness, push away all of this ideology, push away all of this type of thing, and still there and reveal the fact that Jesus is the Christ. I mean, that to me is it's just like one thing after another. It's just like the Holy Spirit is not going to be stopped.
Yeah.
And it just pushes it aside. The thing about Caesar is that, here is Jesus, who's 100% man and 100% God, and Caesar is a man who wants to be God, right? He's being worshipped. There was another place where they would idol worship Caesar, and it's like put in there, and it's like all of this stuff going on, all of this pagan idolatry, and it is in that location where it would be like being in like one of these black masses and having the Holy Spirit, just break out. It would be accustomed to that. So I think sometimes when we read, the Bible and we read these stories, sometimes you really have to meditate on the story. You really have to think about and look at the historical perspectives of exactly where these things transpired. But
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, it is. And that's why we want to, bring this information to you. This is why, we want to have these tough conversations that, we feel like the church needs to be having more. And again, we're going back to the beginning. People want to know, before the Bible was written. Well, when you see Genesis and Exodus and all these books, the Bible had not been written yet. And so it goes back to talk about the original relationship that God had with man. And that was the sole purpose of God creating man, was to have that relationship. So there doesn't need to be anything in between that. We don't need, any type of pendants, or we don't need to worship the creation when we have the creator who intended us to have a relationship with him. And so, getting back onto the 10 Commandments, which is very important because, again, at this time, human beings didn't have any real regulations or set of rules, and man felt like they could live righteously. And so the reason for the 10 Commandments is so that God would give man a code to live by, to actually be righteous. And so then I would love for you to dive in on again, what's with the importance of the 10 Commandments.
Well, one of the things about the 10 Commandments is that they have been criticized, that Moses just kind of went out and copied from the Assyrians, and just copied some of the other local people that had been there already, and that he had just kind of like put this together, and he had this stuff kind of in his own mind, and of course we know that is not true, because the other laws that were there that had been that preceded the 10 Commandments set up a class system. So in other words, if you were a wealthy person, right, written into the law, you had a different responsibility and liability towards the law than somebody that was not wealthy or was not a landowner. It was like right there. And there was all of these different types of things that were written into the law. And of course, that's not the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments basically is a document that is written, and it does not speak to any kind of a class system, does not create a class system, does not create a difference between male and female, right? It just doesn't create that at all. And the one thing that you really have to, you take away from that after you read that, of course, is that the level of respect that there is towards humanity, right? For there to be, that level so simple, just 10 little things, it really just speaks to, treating people in a way and respecting their humanity, right? That's really, and that's the difference in the 10 Commandments as opposed to any of these other things that are out there that predate the 10 Commandments or came afterwards. It's just like there is just this this lack of with these other laws, just this lack of respect for humanity, and these horrible punishments. We have this eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth type of situation where I'm not sure that that's really what our sense, certainly today, of justice is, right? We don't have necessarily that sense of it. It's like how is that going to help anybody? But that was, eagerly done. We want to make sure. So I don't think the comparison between the 10 Commandments and any of these other laws that have come before or since really are, applicable, So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And, you'll hear some people say, oh, well, the 10 Commandments are contradictory, right? They'll say something like, it says, thou shalt not kill or murder, right? But yet you'll see where God is telling Joshua, for example, to wipe out a whole community of people, kill the men, women, and children, and all this other stuff. And I think one of the things that people fail to realize is that there is a difference between punishment and murder. Murder was unlawful, right? And what was happening with these people were they were given hundreds of years to repent, to turn back to God, and they had not done that, and this was their punishment for that. And so again, if you believe in God, look up the definition of God. You can look it up, Google it, and it is a moral supreme being, right? So if you have a moral supreme being, then this person is able to judge from a moral standpoint. And there's a big difference between punishment and murder. And again, all through the books, even when you talk about, the eye for an eye at that time, but basically what God was trying to say is you need the crime, the punishment needs to fit the crime, right? So like if someone does something that isn't worthy of killing them, but you kill them, then it's not fair. And so there's you have to really look at the 10 commandments and even the other commandments, because the Israel people were given other commandments outside of the 10. But you really have to look at them, dissect them, each one for themselves, look at the context of that time, of what was going on. Like you said, there were other rules that man had made. But again, the reason for the 10 commandments was because those rules weren't fair. They weren't just, right? And they were man-made. And so God wanted to give a set of rules that would set his people apart and put them above and beyond all these other nations.
Yeah, you bring up a good point though, with the punishment and murder. So you think about a just God, right? So it sounds as though that you're kind of alluding to the fact that at some point even God throws his hands up, right?
I mean, I think you would have to. I think, because if not, then it's you're continuously living in this evilness, which if you look at the Noah, back with Noah, that's one of the things basically God was saying, like these people are not getting better. They're not changing. They're not bettering themselves or their family. I mean, these people were killing their own children. They were having crazy orgies and all types of just evilness was just running rampant throughout the world. And, God is a God of free will. And so he's not going to just put his foot down and just stop everything from the sense of making you do something, but he will wash his hands of it. He will wash clean the slate and start anew. And that's where you see Noah. And in fact, in Noah, when he finally reaches land again, that's where you see the first altar. So this is before, I don't know, was that before the Tower of Babel? I think that was before the Tower of Babel.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So you see the actual first altar that Noah created to God. And so again, this is all very deep stuff that you have to start to study. You can't just read the Bible to read it. You really need to read it to study. It's two different ways to look at it. And so again, we're just bringing you a different perspective, another way to kind of look at things, another way to understand things, because there's a lot of information out there right now, a lot of false information, disinformation, as my mother would say, and that's where people intentionally give you misleading information. And so, you got to know the truth for yourself. There's a difference between truth and facts. That's something else you need to know. And so this is the start of that. I'm giving you the truth and the facts.
Yeah. And then also too, like just to pull back some of the layers, right? And just to see exactly, we talked about like culturally, so we look at it, the trying to do the hermeneutics, what did it mean to the people when it was written? That's what it really means now. That's right. Sometimes you I know there are times where I've heard different things and it's just like, I don't know about that. I'm not too sure. But I think it's really you really have to get into the word and study the word for yourself, like every day. That's just you brush your teeth every day. You got to be reading that word every day. I mean, it's just that simple. I know that there are times when you leave the service or whatever, and you gotta follow up. It's just like I never knew that before, and I would encourage those that are tuning in now. Absolutely. Go back. Look in that Bible, make sure that that James and I are right on target here. And if you have any questions, the next time that we're on, of course, we would address that. But by no means take our word for it. Do your own study. We want you to get involved with this thing, and to study up yourself and show yourself approved. That's really the key.
That's it. So yeah, we'll definitely be doing more these types of conversations. I got a laundry list of different topics that people have responded to on Facebook. And even in different conversations, family conversations and stuff like that. And so I'm pretty sure you've had conversations, you had thoughts. There's always the topic of, well, if there was a God, how come good people die and how come babies die and all this type of stuff. So we'll get into all of that type of stuff. We want to make sure that, we give each topic its own time and its own sensitivity. And so, like Dan said, do your own research, do your own studying. By no means take our word for it. We're definitely coming from a biblical standpoint. That's what we believe. But we also understand that there are questions that sometimes the church doesn't necessarily get into or talk about. And so, these are some of the topics we want to talk about, shed some light on. And we just hope that it plants a seed or waters a seed for you to go out and start to do your own research and have a thirst for the truth.
Yeah. Right. But yeah. So I did want to touch just briefly on that altar piece that you were talking about with Noah. It's the first altar that is built. Right, it's the first record of one. It's the first time that we read about that. And what I find is very interesting is that Noah doesn't have to thank God, right? Noah doesn't have to do anything. Noah he made it, and it's just like he is demonstrating that it really is proper to be thankful for the things that the Lord has brought us through, and it just really interests me that whole story is like extremely interesting on so many different levels. But primarily, if you've ever been around animals, right? If you've ever been around walking dogs and feeding dogs, or worked on a farm or whatever the case is, that Christmas morning that dog's got to go out, right? I mean, New Year's Day, those whatever is your responsibility. And one of the things that I find very interesting is I mean, God could have done this any number of ways, but by putting all of those animals on that ark, he forced those people to be in a routine. He gave them a responsibility outside of what was going on, and sometimes I think about, going back to our idea of, reading and studying and so forth like that. It is almost like tending to something outside of our own problems, right? Being on the inside of an ark, being on the inside, on a life's journey, you're in your house or your prayer closet, whatever the case is. And it's almost, it's a discipline in and of itself, right? Where you're just reading the word and you're just, doing all of that. And similar to that kind of thing that Moses and his family had to do. They had to do this regardless of the waves, regardless of the lightning, regardless of whatever. They still had to feed those animals. They still had to do all of that type of stuff, And it's just like I find the Lord is gives us like little jobs to do, and that's like, for me, that's what one of my little jobs is every day, to keep my head in the game and just to concentrate on who He is. And this routine, to get into a routine, into a practice. And so I'm able then to ignore all the waves and the pushing about that happens,
Yeah, that's deep. That's real deep right there, Dan. You preaching now, buddy. Preaching now. I did want to bring up one other thing, because you mentioned that, and it made me think of, and we had this conversation in one of our Bible studies, the first sacrifice is when after Adam and Eve eat the apple, and then they hide themselves from the Lord, and then they realize that they're naked, and then the Lord makes sheepskin or something like that. He kills some animal and makes clothing from that animal. So there is where you see the first sacrifice being made on man, and it's made on man's behalf. And then you see it again with Noah when he builds the ark. When they get to dry ground, he builds the altar, and then he does a sacrifice there as well to God. And so, again, when you look at these other religions have rituals where they do sacrifices and different things like that. But the original, again, before the Bible, God was doing that on man's behalf, and so again, we just want to encourage you guys to just do your homework, do your research, where a lot of this stuff really did originate from. And so I just wanted to make sure we add that, because somebody might, again, you do your research and you see what you find.
Yeah, it's just interesting. The more the Old Testament, it just really is a discovery of God's character, right? So even of course he knows what they've done. They're hiding, right? Of course he knows, and then they tell him or whatever, and he doesn't slap them around. He doesn't do, and he goes and he kills animals to cover their sin. And the sacrificial system, was still, we are so far away from, seeing a sacrifice for our own dinner table. Right? We've lost that kind of idea, right? It's just, something had to die so you could live, right? Something had to die. Sin is so serious that something innocent has to die. And of course, that's the message of the cross, right? So we don't have the sacrificial system anymore. Jesus did away with that. He was the ultimate. But think about, and that goes back to what you were saying before, James, with the punishment piece and not murder. It was just a sovereign, perfect, moral God has to punish sin. It's just that simple, So where we could see where the sacrifice of Jesus now reconciled us back to God. We're no longer at war with him. We are reconciled back, so through the work of the cross.
Amen to that. Real. Well, again, everyone, please leave questions, inbox us, leave comments. We'd love to, touch on other topics that you have. Like I said, we got a laundry list of things we're going to be talking about. We're even going to talk about how Christianity was used in slavery. I know that's a hot topic for people, so we're going to be talking about everything, and we're not running from nothing. Okay, and so we encourage you guys to engage with us. Ask questions while we're on the live. If we could type up and find some answers through the Bible and different things like that, we'll share them with you as well. So, do you have anything else, Dan?
No, that's pretty much it there. I think that's we've covered what we needed to cover. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have this up on YouTube, and you'll be able to find it online, so you can watch it again, or watch it and then have questions or whatever the case may be. So again, we encourage you guys to do your own research, do your homework, and find it for yourself.
Okay. All right, sir.
All right. Appreciate you, Dan. We'll do it again soon.
Man. Okay. Have a good evening.
All right. You too.